Okay.
Good morning. Thank you all very, very much for coming. My name is Lydia Berzon. I'm director of the Humanitarian Law Project, and I am joined this morning by Blaise Bompain of Office of the Americas, Evangeline Ordaz. She's an attorney, also a professor at CSUN, and is also here representing Frente Zapatista Los Angeles. Ben Eichert, who is the director of the video that you might have seen as you walked in, Comunique Zapatista, and we may be joined shortly, hopefully, by Eris Anagnos of Americans for Democratic Action. Most of us are now aware of the atrocities of the massacre that took place in Acteal, Chiapas. I will show you on the map where this is in relation to San Cristobal. This is, I think I will. Okay, this is San Cristobal, and this is Chenaló, which is the municipality where the atrocities took place. However, what we are here to testify to, and all of us here have been to Mexico, we have been to Chiapas, we have been in the indigenous zones, we have been there during this period of crisis where there has been a war raging, even though it has not been known to most people in the media at all times. There are approximately 2 to 4 people that are massacred, as these 45 were weekly in these communities in Chiapas. We have a video that we have brought you by a documentarian by the name of Carlos Martinez Suarez, and he is a documentarian that usually does documentaries for the diocese in San Cristobal de las Casas. This documentary was shot November the 20th of this year, the day after the initial massacre that went underreported in the same community. So that the people that were massacred last Monday were victimized twice. People were murdered. As you will see in this community, you will see their homes being burned down in the background. And at the place where they are being interviewed is where they're all serving as refugees right now. When they fled their homes, some of them went to Acteal, which was where they were in church praying for the people who had already been murdered on November 19th and were subsequently massacred in cold blood, most of them children and women. The true atrocity here is that the government knew. They knew the names. You will hear the list of names of the people that committed the atrocity, the same type of massacre, on November 19th. You will be shown, they are going to point out where the people responsible live that committed the atrocity. These are people that are in and around the local communities that are being subsidized by the government. So this is what you are going to witness. The people that you are going to see on the film, many of them were the massacred victims. So we are going to start the videotape now. Unfortunately, I don't have enough copies to give all of the media, but if some of you want the full video, which is 35 minutes, which obviously we're not going to show this morning, I will get it to you later this afternoon. I'm getting some other copies made.
Start the video.
Que no participan en la asamblea, ellos son los que provocaron. Entonces se encontraron por sorpresa de pobres compañeros y toda la comunidad porque se fueron a cortar café el día de ayer. No se sabe nada si va a entrar ahí los grupos agresores. Pero desgraciadamente entonces las dos comunidades, entonces está atacado ahorita como recién quemado estas casas de toda esta parte. Y la que se ve es es un barrio de la comunidad de Acteal que se llama Zapaluco. Entonces, pero los barrios blancos ahí están rodeados por gente de los religiosos civiles, de las abejas, que se ve un templo aquí retirado, ahí están amontonados todos. Pero yo creo que por temor ahorita, porque ahí están rodeados los de las guardias blancas paramilitares, ahí estaban. Cuando llegó la seguridad pública a participar, entonces se escondieron un poquito. Entonces, hasta esta fecha o hasta esta hora no sabemos si hay muertos o hay heridos. ahorita como las 9 para las 12 del día de hoy, 20 de noviembre de
There were
1997.
3,000
Entonces,
refugees
esa es la
from
que
these
fue el día de ayer,
surrounding
pero
communities
se
as a
continúa,
result of the
entonces,
initial
mira
attack
cómo
on
está
November 19th. To
quemando.
date,
Pero
not one single
un señor
person of the
que
people they are
allí
going
no
to name
participa de los
have even been
acuerdos en la
questioned,
comunidad de
much less
Pechiquín,
arrested.
que vive allí, tienen un depósito de refresco. Entonces lo que tienen guardado todas las gasolinas
He
para
is
quemar las casas
describing where
y
the
también las balas
warehouses
para
are
agredir
for
toda
the
esta parte.
gasoline that they
Pero el día
use.
de ayer tienen su plan, su acuerdo que iban a atacar ese
Oh,
barrio
okay.
Tulantic, pero no, yo creo que por una gracia que hubo el Tulantic no está atacado hasta este momento, pero según su plan que escuchamos, iban a atacar, pero no, la que está sufriendo ahorita es Tezcajaluco.
¿Ustedes saben quién es el que está organizando las guardias blancas?
¿Cómo no? En comunidad de Pechiquil es Hilario Guzmán.
These are the names.
¿Cómo se llama? Pérez. Hilario Guzmán Pérez. Ah, Hilario Guzmán Luna.
Manuel Guzmán Pérez, Felipe Guzmán Gómez.
Forward again because we don't have time to watch the whole tape, but so that you can see a little bit of the testimony of the women and children who fled, who are, as I said, some of whom are dead now, as a result of the warnings that were not heeded as a result of the first aggression. Give me a second now. Bear with me. And by the way, the aggressions against these communities have been going on for 7 months. Okay. Here is one woman who was strafed by a bullet fragment that took out her teeth. They speak Totsil. They speak an indigenous language.
Quedó desmayados. Es que
A little bit more. And then, as I said, I can distribute some tapes later. Hundreds of refugees in this particular location. Last night they were going to have a meeting because they're mortified because now the military has moved in and the communities perceive the military as backing the paramilitaries. So last night they were going to take a decision as to whether to go to San Cristobal because they feel that as a refugee camp where they thought they were safe was where the others were massacred. And now they have fled to Polo, which is where this is interview is taking place. And they're afraid that the increased militarization is simply going to give support to the paramilitary because that has been the way things have been working there. I'm going to turn the volume of the victims. These are the survivors of those who were hatcheted to death, who after they had been shot were then again shot at close blank range. Again, it defies all logic and all reason that the government did not know this was coming in view of the fact that there has been an accelerated aggression. There were attempts on the bishop, the Archbishop Ruiz from the Archdiocese in San Cristobal, very recently by the other paramilitary group, Paz y Justicia, who, by the way, the government just rewarded after that attempted assassination on the bishop. They just rewarded them with 4.6 million pesos. Officially, the contract has been made public, and it was published in the Mexican newspaper La Jornada last Sunday. The government cannot distance itself from what has transpired in view of the fact that you just saw this documentary. There was another documentary that was aired on Sunday, December 7th, in national television that showed all of these atrocities. So it isn't like the government can say, we didn't know that this was going on. It isn't like they can say, we didn't have the names or any clues as to who were committing these atrocities. And something that is not known is that many of the victims were also priistas, belonging to the same party as the government. But who were these priistas? For those who do not understand Spanish, what the gentleman explained was that these are the priistas who coincide side by side with the zapatistas in these communities and who have agreements. They continue working. They were cutting their coffee, in fact, when they were assaulted in this attack. But then there are these provocateurs, these paramilitaries that come in to try to create a conflict. If the priistas that are in the community do not want to join them in these atrocities, they are killed. And that is the lesson that is taken away time after time after time. We went down in April in a similar situation after another massacre in a local community called San Pedro, where after the massacre you have all the police and the military side by side protecting these paramilitary, standing by as houses are ransacked. And in fact, in that instance, it was someone from the Attorney General's office that was seen in the helicopter shooting from the air and killing people, including a 70-year-old man. This has been going on weekly in Chiapas and far more accelerated in recent weeks. What we believe is that this recent attack was a pretext to do what has been going on the past few days, with the support of the U.S. government that has said we support President Cedillo in whatever it takes to get to the bottom of this, with the support of official UN statements that say we support President Cedillo to get to the bottom of this, which all that it resulted in was President Cedillo announcing that he was going to give greater resources to the state of Chiapas, which is the basic funding for these paramilitary groups, and increasing the militarization and raising the stakes in a war that has not been resolved. The big question now also is that is on everyone's mind is what is going to be the response on the part of the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas put out a communique yesterday. They have not decided what their response is going to be, but they are at the will of these indigenous communities. When we were there in April and we spoke to some of the comandantes of the EZLN, they said that it was very difficult for them to contain the situation because the communities were outraged at what was going on. As you can well imagine, they felt vulnerable and they felt if they don't fight back, then they're all going to be annihilated, which seems to be the genocidal tendency right now. So it is our contention, A, that President Cedillo and the federal government is directly responsible for what is going on. There is ample evidence to that, and I will continue to comment later after other people have spoken, and we all can give our thoughts on this. B, and Blaise will also comment to this, is we need to find out what is the role that the United States is playing in this. The largest U.S. embassy in the world is in Mexico City. They have people at the peace talks between the Mexican government and the EZLN. They have people, representatives from the U.S. Embassy in Chiapas all the time. So again, it isn't like they didn't know these things were going on and that it could only get worse and that there were massacres in the offing. All of the human rights groups have been clamoring and saying the massacres are going to get larger and larger because these paramilitary groups feel they have the total support of the state and federal government. So what we need to do is to question our own government, our own elected officials as to what is the U.S. participation in this role. We are an NGO with consultative status at the UN. It is incumbent on us because every single NGO that has gone into Mexico has come away with incredible reports of human rights abuses. It has never been the perception that Mexico was El Salvador or Guatemala, but it is. And it has been very difficult to get that point across in some of these international circles, but now we're starting to get some response. The Special Rapporteur on Torture went to Mexico recently and came away with some scathing condemnation of the human rights abuses that take place there. But they do not take place in a vacuum. They cannot take place after NAFTA and because of the relationship between Mexico and the United States, these things, it's impossible for them to have taken place without the knowledge of the United States government. And so now I will let Blaise speak to that issue since I've opened the door again.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Blaise Bonpane. I'm Director of the Office of the Americas. And as U.S. citizens, we are particularly concerned about the role of the United States in this particular relationship at this time. This is something we've seen many times before. We were able to see the absolute relationship between the death squads of El Salvador and the military of El Salvador, the death squads of Guatemala and the military of El Salvador, of Guatemala, each member of the death squads carrying a card, Comisionado Militar. And now we're seeing a similar situation in Mexico as we have seen it recently in Colombia. It is a relationship between paramilitary and military groups. The military wanting to keep its public relations not to be known as a genocidal group, has its related so-called private armies and death squads which do not act without direction from the military. We see also the constant presence of the Central Intelligence Agency involved in this and involved in the matter of training of these people. This is a long history. It emanates from a school known as the School of the Assassins, which is formerly known as the School of the Americas. It's trained tens of thousands of people in torture, in assassination techniques. It's all documented. These are not some kind of claims that are made without substance. We've had massacres throughout the Americas for which this school is responsible. At this time, we're training more Mexican staff, military staff, than we've ever trained before. So as we hear words like Guardias Blancas, Paz y Justicia, we're hearing about paramilitary groups that are intimately linked with the ruling party of Mexico and with Mexico's Mexico's government. So it's time for us to stop the charade. Related to this is another charade of the war on drugs. Being present in Chiapas, where there is not a drug activity, we were able to see U.S. anti-drug war helicopters being used against the Zapatistas from the outset of this conflict. So there are several things that have to be opened up as a result of this massacre. One is the fact that the war on drugs is used as a counterinsurgency cover in Colombia, in Mexico, in Peru, as it has been elsewhere. Two, the relationship between the training of these people and the behavior that's taking place now in Chiapas, that we cannot act as if we have impunity in this matter. Our president has encouraged Zedillo to continue his tactics, and what we have to do is get real on this and understand that this is not an accidental situation. The low-intensity warfare has been taking place since 1994 with the numbers of people being killed every week. This happens to be one of the larger massacres. Just review your history as you think of this, that we were able to observe these massacres throughout Central America for over 14 years now, and in each case we've seen the same relationship between death squad, military, paramilitary, Central Intelligence Agency. So I think it's time to unmask the situation and realize that not only does the Mexican government give approval to this, but our government is giving approval by its support for their position.
I may also add that many of the 500 graduates from School of the Americas are stationed in Chiapas and are directing some of the more serious regions where these atrocities have been taking place. We'll hear from Evangeline Ordaz.
Hi,
She is an attorney. She is both on the board of Humanitarian Law Project and of Frente Zapatista Los Angeles, and a professor at CSUN, and has also been an immigrant rights attorney.
I'm a professor of Chicano Studies at California State University, Northridge. And by way of analysis, I think it's important to also realize that these situations, as they occur in Mexico, directly affect affect and have been affecting the immigrant situation in the United States, especially here in Los Angeles, the home to the largest number of Mexicans outside of Mexico, except for Mexico City. It's important to realize that this sort of thing is not a new thing. These paramilitary groups are direct descendants of the Guardias Blancas, which are the private police forces, the private armed forces of the large landowners in Chiapas. And these Guardias Blancas, or these private paramilitary forces, exist throughout Mexico, in Guerrero, in Oaxaca, in all the places where you see conflict between indigenous communities and people sympathetic with the ruling party. And it's important to realize that while these situations have their roots in the poverty that the indigenous people are forced to live in, they have no option sometimes but to arm themselves against these private paramilitary forces of the large landowners. And so when people come, we say that the people from Mexico are economic immigrants. Yes, they are. They're fleeing poverty, but they're also fleeing this sort of horrendous violence that has been taking place for centuries in Mexico, as the large landowners try to solidify their positions and solidify their wealth and intimidate anybody that would challenge that wealth, or anybody else who would be trying to strive for mere subsistence, which the indigenous do. That's all that they're trying to do. And when the Zapatista army staged their uprising in January of '94, it was only after years of attempting to work peacefully to achieve some semblance of dignity and to achieve some basic way of meeting their basic needs of food, shelter, medical attention. But when that happens, you get these paramilitary forces that are already in place becoming much more aggressive. And as they become much more aggressive, and as the conflict gets worse, you'll find more and more people fleeing and coming to Los Angeles. And as Blaise was saying, if the American government is at least tacitly supporting these sort of paramilitary actions supported by the Mexican military, then it is also our responsibility to care for the immigrants that flee as a result of these conflicts.
Thank you. Next, we want to hear from Marta Gonzalez. Marta Gonzalez is of the Big Frente Zapatista. They took a delegation to Oventic, where they're building, in fact, there's a delegation leaving from San Diego and Los Angeles today for Chiapas. They will be in Oventic building a junior high school, the first time the indigenous have had a junior high school. Marta was part of a group that went down there to interchange artistry. That is to say, together, they wrote music together, they painted paintings together. They saw and learned for weeks what it was that the indigenous communities in the Zapatista territories are trying to achieve. And it is the crimes, the trying to live their lives in this autonomous fashion, that is the crime that the federal government cannot tolerate and is what they're trying to wipe out. But let's hear it firsthand from Marta Gonzalez.
Marta Gonzalez, thank you, Lidia. Basically, it's all nonviolence. It's about nonviolence. It's always been about nonviolence. I think we all know that the most powerful thing, we're all used to that the most powerful thing, and the only way that somebody can get attention is through guns or something like that, right? So I think that some people have a misconception about what the Zapatistas are all about. Just by our children are the ones who really show how it is a society is, right? When we were there, the children always, when they played, the children were not about play fighting. They were not about shooting guns at each other or playing with toy guns. The children were about, basically were about tickling each other and rolling around in the grass, running in the fields. I mean, they weren't about, it was never about violence. And I think that's how we can see how our children are growing up and what they see their parents do. And basically, the children were never about violence. We wrote music with them, as Lidia had said. And some of the things that we wrote with them were ideas and similarities that we have here as Chicanos and that they have, the Indigenas and the struggles that they're going through. And some of the things, one of the songs was about the Zapatistas and their struggles. And basically it fits perfectly what happened in the massacre. And one of the words were, El gobierno manipula, encarcela y asesina. Nosotros los zapatistas romperemos las cadenas. Si no robaron la tierra, si nos quitaron el pan, el pueblo que marcha unido logrará la libertad. El pueblo que marcha unido vencerá. These are their words, these are their thoughts, and this is what they've always been about. They've always been about. It's not about violence. They are the most wonderful people. They don't deserve this. They deserve this kind of attention, and not when they're getting killed and when there's massacres, you know. They deserve this kind of attention at all times. This is exactly what they need. This is exactly the importance that they need, and the words and the concern for them, and not when they've hit the floor and they're doing these to these people. These are human beings at all times. Carcela y asesina. Nosotros los zapatistas romperemos las cadenas. Si no robaron la tierra, si nos quitaron el pan, el pueblo que marcha unido logrará la libertad. El pueblo que marcha unido vencerá.
Hello and welcome to Todos Somos Marcos. On December 22nd, 45 Maya Indians sympathetic to the Zapatista struggle were massacred by paramilitaries in Acteal, Chiapas. Although the world community was quick to deplore the atrocity, there was scant acknowledgement of the deep relationship between the paramilitary, the Mexican military, the ruling PRI, and U.S. political and military support for the corrupt Mexican regime. The National Committee for Democracy in Mexico staged two dramatic events in Los Angeles to call attention to the situation. First, January 2nd at the Mexican consulate, where 45 volunteers donated blood to the Mexican government in solidarity with the massacre victims. Here, they said, you want blood, take ours. The second was at the Federal Building in Westwood, where demonstrators blocked a busy intersection at rush hour to call attention to U.S. and Mexican culpability in the Chiapas killing. Here are some highlights of these two events.
Only 6,000 new Mexican troops have been moved into the area where the massacre occurred. In addition, the military has added more troops to the area surrounding the community of La Realidad, which it is believed to be very near to where Subcomandante Marcos and other members of the leadership are hiding. We are seeing the establishment around that area in addition to special commando units. These are surgical strike teams which have been positioned to essentially take out the leadership. We need to understand that the worst is going to happen, that we are going to wake up one morning and read not just about 45 defenseless men and women and children who've been killed, but it could be 200, it could be 1,000. We are looking at another Vietnam in Mexico unless we do something. It's up to us. And it might not sound pleasant to many here, but in fact, we have a bit of that blood on our hands, civil society. Because for many of you standing out here, there's something within your heart that the Zapatistas have touched since 1994. And initially in 1994, we were consumed by the headiness and consumed by, for some of us, with the glamour or by the profound words that many of the leadership had said. But this is about a revolution. This is about a radical transformation, not only of Mexico, but of the world. Not one in which we can label as communists or socialists, but what we are fighting for is a world in which many worlds fit. A place where we all have a right to a life of dignity, which includes the basic necessities such as food, land, housing, education, health care. Those are the type of issues that are not just limited to Chiapas. They also affect us here in Los Angeles. And many of you gathered here today perhaps are activists, or you live in a neighborhood that is affected, that you struggle every day to bring home enough money to feed your family. Or the fact that today's youth, especially here in Los Angeles, has been criminalized and that we're seeing more of our men and our women going to prison. The fact that we see helicopters and we hear helicopters overhead makes us feel as though we're back in Chiapas, because essentially that's what the people down there hear. They hear the same buzz of helicopters that we hear. So we need to know that we cannot passively sit back, that it's not enough to come down here today. That what this needs to be is part of a sustained action to say that in 1997, we will not put up with another wounded knee. We will not put up with the continued genocide of indigenous peoples. This is nothing less than that. In this country, we already had the genocide of Native Americans, in which millions of Indian women, men, and children were killed. Why? Because the land in which they sat on was valuable. Because it stood in front of something called manifest destiny. Something that rolled all the way across this land. And when we read our history books, it's very romantic. It's just kind of, you have this picture of it kind of rolling across and there's nothing standing in its way. But beneath our footsteps, beneath all of these buildings, is the blood of Indians. And this is happening again in Chiapas. We are at an important crossroads within history in which we are again, we have a choice. Are we going to stand for the genocide of indigenous peoples again as we get ready to launch ourselves into the 21st century? Wasn't one Vietnam enough in this century?
Excuse me, what's the purpose of donating the blood?
We're here in protest of the massacre that happened in Chiapas. 45 people that were killed, children, women, old people, indigenous people of Chiapas. We're here in protest. 45 people are donating their blood. We're taking the blood to Consulado General de Mexico in protest, and we're not going to take this lightly. We're going to be in protest until the PRI, the government of Mexico, stops its killings and until there's justice done. We are not going to stop. This is just the beginning.
Michaela Vázquez Luna.
Presente. Juana Vázquez Luna. Presente.
Juana Luna Vázquez.
Presente. María Jiménez Luna. Presente. Jiménez Ruiz.
Presente. Marcela Luna Ruiz.
Presente. Alejandro Luna Ruiz. Presente.
Jaime Luna Ruiz.
Presente. Regina Luna Ruiz. Presente. Pérez.
Roselia Luna Perez.
Presente. Ignacio Puye Luna. Presente.
Miquela Puja Luna.
Presente. Victorio Vázquez Gómez. Presente.
Agustín Gómez Ruiz.
Presente. Juana Pérez Pérez. Presente.
Juan Carlos Luna Pérez.
Presente. Marcela Vázquez Vázquez. Presente.
Antonia Vázquez Vázquez.
Presente. Lorenzo Gómez Pérez. Presente.
Verónica Pérez Oliarte.
Presente. Sebastián Gómez Pérez. Presente.
Daniel Gómez Pérez.
Presente. Pablina Hernández Vázquez. Presente.
Rosalía Gómez Hernández.
Presente. Graciela Gómez Hernández. Presente.
Guadalupe Gómez Hernández.
Presente. María Ruiz Oyalte. Presente.
Catalina Vázquez Pérez.
Presente. Catalina Luna Ruiz. Presente.
Manuela Pacinía Moreno.
Presente. Margarito Gómez Paciencia. Presente.
Rosa Gómez Pérez.
Presente. Doida Ruiz Gómez. Presente.
Agustín Ruiz Gómez.
Presente. Rosa Pérez Pérez. Presente.
Manuel Vázquez Pérez.
Presente. Juana Vázquez Pérez. Presente.
Josefa Vázquez Pérez.
Presente. Marcela Capote Vázquez. Presente.
Marcela Capate Ruiz.
Presente.
That is the 45 men, women, and children that were brutally massacred on December 22nd. I'd like to call for a moment of silence, please.
Y todos, presente.
Right here, I'd like to call everybody's attention, please. Right here in this glass container, we have the blood of 45 men and women who came forward today to give the Mexican consulate and the Mexican government our blood. For they took the blood of 45 innocent indigenous people on December 22nd. So if they want some blood, they can have some of ours too. We're going to be taking this up to the Mexican consulate shortly. We would like to thank those 45 people for doing this today.
Good afternoon to everyone. Buenas tardes a todos. Quisiera decirles algo que ustedes no esperan. Lo que les tengo que decir es que no tuvimos ninguna resolución a nuestras preguntas. I wish I could tell you something that you did not expect. What I have to tell you is that we received no responses, no resolution of our questions. The principal question being, who are these paramilitary groups? Who is funding them? Who is arming them? Who is training them? And when will there be justice? When will they be punished? La pregunta principal fue, ¿quiénes son estos grupos paramilitares? ¿Quiénes les dan financiamiento? ¿Quiénes los entrenan? ¿Y cuándo se acaba la impunidad? No hubo respuesta a eso. We asked for an independent investigation of the massacre. An international independent investigation. It is not necessary, we were told. The Mexican government is conducting its investigation. We have arrested 40 people, we were told. We asked for there to be a demilitarization of the indigenous communities. There was no response. We asked, how is it possible that in an area filled with 60,000 armed soldiers, that a massacre like this occurred and no one lifted a finger to prevent it? A nuestra pregunta, nuestra demanda de que se sacaran a los militares de las comunidades indígenas, no hubo respuesta, y preguntamos cómo es posible que en un estado donde hay 60,000 tropas no hubo quien levantara un dedo para defender, para prevenir este masacre. Nos entregó copias de cartas, nos dijo que muchos en México, muchos en el gobierno de México se hacen las mismas preguntas que nosotros y que no hay respuesta. He showed us copies of letters he had sent and said that many in Mexico have the same questions and there is no resolution. We left them with one last message. We gave him a jar of blood and we said to him to communicate to those in the government that if they want more blood, to take ours, not to take any more innocent blood, not to shed any more blood of children, to take ours. Le entregamos un jarro de sangre y le dijimos lo siguiente: si el gobierno quiere más sangre, tomen la nuestra. Ya no tomen la sangre de niños inocentes, tomen la nuestra.
Brothers and sisters, I cannot say anything that Cecilia hasn't already said other than to say that we are disgusted and remain angry. Yeah. We do not believe that the Mexican government has any intention of revealing any information regarding the murders of Acteal. I don't know what else to say other than that I am angered that I stand in front of you today willing to participate in any way that I possibly can to bring justice to the families and to defend the Zapatista communities of national liberation. While I was in La Garucha, Chiapas, staying and learning from the communities of rebellion, I stood in a schoolroom trying to assist the children of this community, this war-torn community, knowing that it was the U.S. government who was funding the weapons used to keep these communities at bay, to keep these children unempowered and uneducated and in a constant state of fear. It was then that I was introduced to a young brother by the name of David. David stopped coming to the classes. I wondered why. I asked members of the community why he stopped coming to the classes. They told me that David was proving to his community that he knew what to do. He knew how to represent them. He knew how much corn the community needed to survive over the next months, while the federal army was preventing them from collecting corn from their ejidos. He knew exactly how many people in his community were starving. He knew how many people suffered from curable disease. He knew how many children suffered from tuberculosis. He knew that each child, as their stomach swelled, that he had to do something. And he educated himself. And that he left the classes because he had proven to his community that he could do something. And he was asked by the members of Zapatistas to come up into the mountain, to come up and defend his people, because he knew what to do. He had proven himself. And until every single one of us know what is happening in Chiapas is happening right here in Los Angeles, until each and every one of us can prove that we can go out to our communities and channel this anger and emotion, and channel our frustration, and organize. Until we can prove and learn and understand the brutality of the system of the government of Mexico is also the same system that brutalizes our people here in Los Angeles and all over the world. And once we've proven to our families, to our brothers and sisters, and to the people in our community that we can do this, that we can mobilize, that we can organize, then we too can go up into the mountain. Thank you.
Went on a emergency delegation this week to Chiapas. We began on Wednesday evening with a meeting with Bishop Samuel Ruiz Garcia. He sends his best to you and reminds you that this is the 25th such attack since April of 1997. In that period, 300 people have been killed in similar massacres. Now, if we draw a line between massacre to massacre, we find almost a straight line, creating a cordon sanitaire, that is a channel whereby the military can surround all of the Zapatista operations. Shortly thereafter this meeting, the general of the 7th District said that he found materials, that is weapons, Zapatista weapons, with books written by Samuel Ruiz on top of the weapons. Therefore, Ruiz is directly linked with the Zapatista movement. This was a message, of course, to the death squads to kill the bishop, as Archbishop Romero was killed. We went to his headquarters to ask him what he thought he was talking about. He wasn't there, but we were surprised. On the walls of his headquarters were banners supporting Desarrollo, Paz y Justicia, which of course is the worst of the death squads. And this is something now that the Mexican military is flaunting their relationship to the death squads. We proceeded to Acteal, to the burial site of the people that were killed there this week. We found homework papers with bullet holes through them. The people were shot in the back. They were running into the coffee fields, and they were attacked in this fashion. And it's very difficult to be there and realize what has taken place. Now, the line of the military at this time is that we're here so there will not be another Acteal. Now, that's the line. Now, in order not to have an Acteal, they have occupied school buildings and used them as their barracks. Many of the women in the areas have complained of being raped. We went to Pulo, which is in the same municipality of Chenalo, which is the major center municipality. And there were hundreds and hundreds of refugees. Now, it's very hard for people to get out to their crops. They're afraid to go out because the military presence. We were stopped there by the military, asked a lot of questions, who we were, what we were doing. And to go into these areas now, you get a passport from the Zapatistas. It's their areas, and if we were keeping the accords of 1995, which are still in force, this is before 1996, those accords give the Zapatistas freedom of transit in these areas and also freedom to maintain their weapons. That is all legal in the area. It is not illegal. And in spite of the legality, the army is continuing to intrude. We went up to Aguascalientes II, the authentic Aguascalientes, and found it rather abandoned, but people were beginning to return. It was sad to see the clinic closed there because it's the only clinic in the area. We went up to San Andres, of course, where the peace talks had taken place until October of 1996, and spoke there with the president, who is, of course, indigenous, and he's trying to conduct his Zapatista village in the presence of federales, in the presence of military, with a military base just 2 miles up in the mountains. Perhaps the most touching thing, and maybe some of you have seen the pictures, was in villages like Choyap, where the women physically pushed the army out of the village. Unbelievable. As you know, the people of Mexico today are having a large demonstration. We left from there yesterday, from the Monument of the Angel to the Zocalo. We hope they'll have 1 million people out for that. We hope to follow the spirit of these great people and what they are demonstrating, and the power of the women of the indigenous communities, the men of the indigenous communities, and the fact that every now and then some of the lies backfire. I think the lie of the general about the weapons and the books of Bishop Ruiz has backfired. The books that they found, the subversive books, were the Gospel of St. Mark in Toholabal. They found a hymnal in Toholabal, translated by the bishop. They found some instructions for baptism in Toholabal, and all of those things are very subversive, right? So we've got a great historic movement taking place here, and I want to thank you for being here today and for being part of solidarity with the great people of Mexico, the indigenous Mayan people. Thank you.